Welcome to the J3U University podcast. I'm your host, John Jewett.
And I'm your co-host, Luke Miller.
Our mission is to elevate the physique coaching standard
and deliver the highest level of competitors to the stage.
Let's jump into today's episode. Navigating peak week from afar. This is the struggles and the journey for many of us as online coaches. And what's a great time to talk about these past couple of weeks is because Luke has coached some people from very far away and had some great success with a pro card win in a wellness category in Australia. So for one, Luke, congratulations. And we have Luke to kind of lead us through the struggles of all the online coaching from literally a completely opposite side of the world. So congrats, man. Well done.
Yeah, thank you. It was pretty cool. Emily King's the one who won the pro card, and she's a killer athlete. I think a lot of it comes down to like communication between coach and client, and we're going to kind of see how that can really help this assessment piece. But yeah, I think we just kind of dive into like typically the first thing that I really think that needs to happen is just setting the standard for check-in photos. And this is going to happen for multiple reasons. I think we need consistent lighting for that morning check-in every single week. But I use it as a reference point as well. And I think this is probably the biggest mistake that I see most prep coaches make is that's the only set of pictures they'll use for making decisions. And I think it can leave you in a place where if it's the only setup for lighting that, and we've all done this, and obviously you're not going to be there in person for the show in Australia, but you're prepping this client from afar, you're happening to go to this show, and then you see them and they're not quite exactly where you thought they were because of where their check-in photos make them look like, right? And so just like something I've done over the last 2 years, probably 3 years, is using like a post-workout or a different lighting check-in at the gym in order to compare it to the fasted pre-workout one so that I get a really accurate gauge of exactly how far they are out. And really seeing in like two different lighting setups, like what their actual conditioning looks like. And John, I know you do this too with your preps. Like, do you see this as like a really useful tool that you'll use as well?
Oh, definitely. It's for one, fasted shots can make someone look more or farther ahead, right? So some people have that wake up and their fasted shots look like they're still so many weeks out because they're so flat. And then I'll see them post-workout and they come to life and you're like, oh man, you're just flat. You're actually that muscle pushing against the skin. Now you look more conditioned. While others, their fasted shot is their best look because they drop some water overnight and they only get softer throughout the day. And so you need to know these things of who is on track, but they're just flat versus who actually still needs a little bit more to go. So that's a great, factor to be able to compare to. And then another thing too, Luke, right? It was like, what is the picture that everyone wants to get when they get into their hotel room? That natural light in front of the window, which depends, right? Is it straight on or is it angled? Where the angled one makes you look amazing, right? With that, half natty light. While one with straight natural light is extremely exposing. So if you look conditioned in that type of lighting, like, man, you're going to look bang on stage. But I've seen those come through and you're like, oh no, there was more to go, And you're like, why didn't I look at other lighting? So, even having them get into a little bit of natural light and, this is these last weeks of prep where you're trying to make the call of like, do I need to pull more off or not? Because those last finer details, sometimes even though we have our iPhones and things like this, you're not able to truly capture the level of detail that needs to go on stage. And we see tons of photos, right? Like from IG, guys looking peeled out of their minds, like, man, and then it's not translated to stage. And why is that? It's because they actually still had more to go. And the IG stage looks right on. However, it's not. There's still just that last bit to go. So having those multiple shots can really help you delineate if someone's ready or not.
Yeah, and I really want to set this framework for a client management aspect too, before we kind of get into like tan, no tan, data collection, that kind of thing. Because I do think it can really help a client when you have multiple spots for check-ins. There's like one check-in in particular with Emily that I specifically remember that she sent me her check-ins, and she was at the point where she was doing WhatsApp updates because I switch over to like the daily updates at a certain point during prep for people through WhatsApp. And when she sent me that check-in, you could tell in her tone and the way that she was like typing out her stuff that she was really disappointed, and she like quote unquote looked like a potato because like the lighting wasn't quite great and she was kind of flat. And I was like, it's like, let's just stick to the game plan. Here's your macros for today. Send me post-workout photos. And literally, I believe the message was crisis averted when she sent the post-workout photos, because it was like, she just looked phenomenal, right? Food is in, fluids in. She's not in that like natural light that's not exactly great for a pale skin white person. So it's an interesting dynamic psychologically too, because when you have someone that is ready and relative to the class standards, psychological environment is the biggest thing to manage, like especially if you're stringing along multiple shows like we were with Emily, because we did 3 shows. We're actually about to do our 4th at New York. We're doing New York Pro here this weekend. So yeah, so it's just a huge environment to manage. But I do think that kind of leads into data collection for prep, because man, tan versus no tan, that data collection is just a gold mine, don't you think?
Yeah, I mean, the reality of it, right, is like even if you're in person, might not be able to be backstage for some reason. And then with just the varying amounts of, lighting that you do have, your eye might start wanting to play trick on you, and you might be an earlier on coach and feel a little emotional about decisions. But have you done your homework prior to peak week or during, as I should say too, of collecting data on trying to find this best look and associate it with a body weight? I'll tell you, man, the scale is such a great tool that many don't utilize, because it's like, well, we don't get on stage and they don't ask our weight, right? But the look you associate your best look with that scale weight, it's pretty right on for that range to put someone on stage. So when your picks are failing you and you're questioning yourself, go off that scale weight, because it can really help with getting someone to that right look, and even helping you gauge whether someone's flat or full, if they do look softer, right? So if scale weight's up and they look softer, they may be a little too full. If scale weight's down, they look softer, they could be a little flat. So Luke, I know with Emily, you had kind of this range that you worked within, but you found like a pretty dead on body weight and visuals, because she was ready ahead, right?
Yeah, way ahead.
You'd want to put her on stage with.
Yeah, we were ready. So we did 2 regionals just to get some stage time and, get in front of judges that were going to be judging her. We won the overall at both of those regionals before we did the pro qual. And we pretty much had it bang on that, like, after a couple trials and P testing, like 3 days of loading, 1 day of close to maintenance, and then step on stage the next day was perfect for like a loading strategy. But the weight range was 59.5 to 60.5. When we start getting up to like 61, some of the lines that we like for wellness start to get a little blurred. We start getting into sub 59, and this is in kgs. We start getting too hard relative to the wellness class. And so this is kind of where, like, when you're using that scale, no matter what lighting they end up taking, because we've been there, like backstage, terrible lighting, you're darker than like a stained wood. You can't see a dang thing. It's like, this is
one of Emily's pics she sent you, it's like she might as well take it like in a closet, right, with the lights off, right? No, and nothing to Emily. It's just, this is how it is backstage, right? Sometimes you're just like doing your check-ins in the shadows.
Yeah. So, and so it's a great tool to be able to make decisions in unideal environments, and pretty much just held her like 60.3, 60.4 the entire day, and just ran off that. And she sent me like a good video and good lighting about an hour and a half out of stage, and it was like bang on. It's like, of course, like we've perfected this process. We know how much fluid, how much food, what weight on stage. All that came from data collection before. And really the only tweak from the first peak to the second and third peak was the weight that I put her on stage. Because at Melbourne for the regional, I went like 59.7. Great look, won the overall. I felt like she could have been fuller seeing it on stage. And so we went above 60 for the next one. It was perfect, and we just rinsed and repeated for the pro qualifier and won the overall.
And for those out there listening that aren't too plugged into Luke's coaching or what we do here is like, we're Excel sheet wizards, to where this is where he's documenting when you talk about data collection is like we have a daily log where we're associating weights and meals and fluids, and so we can refer back to and look at this to compare over time. So that's a extremely helpful tool to be able to utilize in those situations. Luke, what I wanted to ask too is that, for one, I've had some people ask me about, hey, I'm 5 weeks out, I'm trying to find my best look. It's like, it's a little bit early to be doing that, because things are going to be changing. You're still dieting. This is when you are actually contest lean and ready for the show. A lot of times, if you're experienced, man, we can do this within 1 day out, right? Like you have someone that needs to make weight, like a classic physique guy. And then as you're loading him up, you're watching him close to find the look, and you find it, and you already know the next day where you want to put him. Now, if we have classes without weight classes, we might have a couple days within this. Now, Luke, what I want to ask you is that there are changes environmentally that are going to skew that look and that weight, because, with weight, there's a lot of influencing factors. One being like, if you are changing food sources and if you're dropping veggies out, that's going to skew weight down. So how do you manage that when you have those type of situations occurring? And because many times we do, right? You're usually might be a little lighter than the actual look you find earlier on in peak week.
Yeah. And I think it comes down to so the spreadsheet idea that I use for peak testing and then actual peak week of all of this, I'll make a version on my phone for the last 24 to 48 hours where each check-in I'm getting, I'm writing down weight and fluids and visuals and just confirming that so that I'm assessing for how much weight drop did the GI drop actually occur. And the wellness and bikini, it doesn't seem to be too drastically off, just relative amount of tissue and stomach volume is not quite as high. So from a kilos perspective, you might see the 60.5 look actually be 60.3 or 60.2, which is, not even a full pound on a English unit scale. Bodybuilders and classic physique is where the shift is a little bit more drastic, especially when you're doing heavy weights and super heavies. You'll see 2 and 3 pound shifts on that visual. That's just from the GI drop. But I'm kind of doing it, and just to be honest, I'm doing it those last 48 hours, comparing it to the data I had collected in previous, right? So if I have that peak testing and a number that I like coming in, I'll use those photos to compare to the numbers we're getting, 24, 36, 48 hours out, so that I can see if it's much different from a weight drop perspective. You'll find it's dropped a smidge, but it's often not a ton. For your biggest bodybuilders, probably 2 pounds, 2 to 3 maybe.
Yeah, it sounded like with Emily, you were running macros for her, and her food sources were relatively pretty consistent anyway.
Yeah, so she's very good about keeping food the same. She'll change a sauce a little bit or something, but she's advanced to the point where I send her macros. She'll send me a little screen recording of the meal plan for the day, and then I'll approve it or not approve it and then go from there. So that it's just super easy. It's consistent. She's using the same foods. It's split relatively easily throughout the day. And it just makes my assessment piece super easy as well.
Thanks everyone for tuning in to today's podcast. Are you struggling to hit your peak on show day? Feeling lost in the off season? Upgrade your coaching game with J3 University. Our program covers everything from off season to contest prep to peak week, all based from real client results. Along with our comprehensive physique curriculum, you'll also get access to our 4 rooms with our J3U team to answer any questions you have, and live Q&A sessions to further your coaching and athlete experience. We are the source of education for top IFBB pros and coaches. Join us to elevate the coaching standard at J3 University. Let's get back to today's podcast. Yeah, so I think if you have someone that is using a higher amount of veggies in place, that's where you might see that skewed. Essentially, you take care of some of that earlier on in peak week. I realize some of it's going to stay in place though. And when you have a big drop overnight, you'll just go off your picks and scale weight. look at your athlete and ask them, hey, does your waist feel extremely small? Like you dropped some GI weight, or were you up peeing all night? Did you sleep like crap? Do your legs feel extremely heavy? You know, trying to find the weight and see where it came from is what I'm also doing. And they're saying, oh my gosh, yeah, I had this, I feel like completely emptied out. Like I can pull my belly button to my spine. Like, okay, this was probably GI weight. Let's shift our data collection points down a little bit. You also comparing visuals from the day prior, because essentially you probably have that same fasted morning light, and then you go from there.
Yeah. And I think it just makes the process so easy. I think this is also why I use a weight range, because like if you compare like about a 2-pound weight gap for most people, it's a relatively similar look, minus like a touch of fullness or a touch of sharpness in certain areas, right? Where it's like most prominent to see. And this is where like when we start getting into unideal check-ins for show week and getting back to the assessment piece, is like, it is nice to have reference points in case of like super unideal situation. So Mel also competed. She got second to Emily at the regional show. She got third at the pro qualifier. Great athlete. She kills it as far as like execution goes. She kind of got stuck in a place backstage where her boyfriend wasn't there. She had just finished tan and there was like no lighting. So the check-in video that she had to send me was like not the greatest. It was extremely dark. But she sent a video. And I think this is where using video for assessment can be huge, because you can start to see, you know, how things look as they're moving through poses. But I also had body part reference points where you could see with her like top line of the glute and glute med would really drop off if she wasn't full, and she'd have trouble filling her back shots. So I talked about this across the coaches weekend. She would like rock in and out of the back pose trying to find glutes when she was on the flatter side. And so I was using that reference point and whether she was doing that excessively or not to kind of get a gauge of where she was at, because she forgot her scale. She had no lighting and she didn't have any good data for me. It's like, you're going to be stuck in situations where mistakes happen and you got to make a good call.
It's funny when I'm at shows and, you know, getting set up, because I'm coaching myself a lot of the time. So it's, I'm like, I enter the room, like, I'm like a secret agent and I need my exit strategy, you know, like you're like scoping it out and I'm like trying to find like, where's my light set up? You know, every room I go into, like, all right, where's my light set up to where I can take my best shots. But, you know, as an athlete, you might want to have someone prepare a little bit and say, hey, backstage, for one, you pack your tripod, always bring it with you, and then take a little LED light. Like they're so easy and small to pack. You even have like ring lights and things that could attach onto your tripods as well. And I've even seen some like really slim, tall LED lights. Terrence Ruffin, he had a cool one at Legion that he took just to take cool pictures. But when I looked over, I was like, oh man, you can really see the detail. And Terrence being darker, that would have been really hard to see otherwise, but it captured that really well. So just like packing a light with you for backstage would be almost an essential item, I think, especially when you don't know what it's going to be like back there. And this is your only point to really relay that to your coach.
Yeah. And that's kind of where also too, like pre-planning can really help with the assessment, because you have everything in order. You're not rushing around. You're not taking extra steps. And I do think when we look at assessing athletes, part of the assessment should be going in like, how do they manage stress and or a show environment? This is why I really like, even for people who don't need to do a regional qualifier for a national show, if I haven't prepped them before, like a lot of times I'll still ask them to do it, because how they manage show day will tell you a lot about how quick they're going to start running away from you. Because some people just walk in, they're smooth, it's easy, assessment's easy, things don't change. But man, some people, like, anxiety gets up, they start to pace and do steps, and then they start running away from you a bit. And it's like, it can make assessment hard if you haven't experienced that before. And when something like a pro card's on the line, like, this is where experience and data really helps.
Yeah, like Prep and Renee, her peak weeks have always been rough because she's kind of high anxiety stressor in these environments, even though it's pretty chill. So it's like, okay, I know for her, like we need the easiest flight to get there. We need to get there early. I need everything planned, like, so she knows where to do. And it's all kind of done in advance to a degree. So it's how you should be managing all your athletes from afar, because you don't know, but also it's just I think a courteous point for your athlete. But some people don't know, like, hey, booking your flight, don't book it like at odd hours where you don't normally fly, or trying to find the cheapest flight where you have all these stops and you miss meals, right? Or even for food. What is the issue with being afar? We're using WhatsApp usually, or some other messenger. And what is the bane of our existence is poor Wi-Fi connection, right? And stuff not getting sent to your athlete. What do you do? Oh my gosh, this has happened to me, or my picks aren't going through. Did you get them? And so this is where you should build out just, hey, here's your tentative plan for the day. And I do this the night before for all the athletes, because through this point, like us working day by day, we have a rough idea every day where this plan's going to be end up going. It's not just pull it out of a hat, right? That random. So I give them the plan. Here it is. If for any reason you don't hear from me and we miss communication, just continue on plan. And so they know what to do in advance. And also it's a food planning point. I've seen some coaching plans where it's like, man, real off the cuff, like, all right, this meal, you need to go eat, 5 ounces of Wagyu top sirloin. You're like, coach, where do I get Wagyu top sirloin at? I didn't bring that in my grocery plan. And so it's like, now they're running out and the stress of doing it. Like, no, here's your food list. This is what we're going to use. It's the same foods that we've been using all prep, maybe a couple extra things, but it's all pre-planned. So there's low stress, especially for the individual that is that micromanager and can get thrown for a loop when there's changes unexpected. So when you're afar, accounting for these issues that can come up with our technology failing us and making sure your athlete knows what to do can be a huge stress relief and just keep someone moving along to nail them on stage.
For those of you that prep international athletes as well, just because I literally just did this morning, is like a lot of the international athletes, in order to compete at pro qualifiers or do a pro show, they had to travel pretty far. And so Emily's going to be doing New York Pro just to kind of get a gauge of where we're at from like a wellness standard of like total size. And so she's got a long flight from Australia, right? And so I literally mapped out what the 24-hour Wednesday was. I gave her a meal beforehand for when she wakes up on her Wednesday in Australia, the macros for the 24-hour time window of travel, and then a weight to eat a certain meal. Like if she lands at 60 kilos or below, she's eating one meal. If she lands above 60 kilos, she's eating this other one, so that she has her last meal before she goes to bed. And it's like, she's going to check in throughout this process, or if I need to modify anything, like I'll just modify it, but she has everything packed. She's got everything for the entire trip, for the travel from Australia all the way to New York. There's like 4 stops. And so she's ready. And it's like, we're not going to miss a beat because she's already pre-planned everything. Right. So it just makes it a lot easier on the athlete when you do it that way.
Well, power to these, foreign athletes out of the U.S., because we are so fortunate here with how many shows and opportunities that we do have. And I totally realize the struggles to compete internationally, because I don't want to do it. The rigors of the travel and the guesswork, and what kind of food we'll have access to, especially if you're going to something that's very foreign to you. Makes just a lot of variables you don't want to manage. So I get it when some of these athletes come over like really far in advance and they just kind of camp out here, but not all of us can do that, right? Like camp out in the US for like a month away from home. So it's a lot to have to manage on an athlete.
When it comes to assessment though, like your golden standards are your peak week data that you either collect with peak testing, or if you run a prep all the way in the peak week, you're kind of doing it on the fly, but you're still doing the same process of information gathering. Standards of video with pictures, I think, is so huge. And then also just having reference points. And I think, we talked about this some, like the situation where you are in person. I don't know if you necessarily should change that process.
Tell me more about this, Luke, because this is what my next question was, is that, some people are, oh, my coach is going to be here in person, or they won't hire a coach because they couldn't be there in person for their show. What pros and cons do you see in this of having to be in person for your client? And I don't think it's always all pros.
No, it's not. I don't think it is. Honestly, the only pro that I see of being in person is helping someone backstage manage a time flow. So like if they're not an experienced athlete and they don't know like how quick classes go or when to start pumping up or anything like that, like to me, that's honestly probably the only pro outside of getting to celebrate with your athlete when you win, right? Those are probably the two main pros. Outside of that, everything else is the same exact process digitally. Like even when you come to look at someone in person, it's confirmation of the photos and videos. But the photos and videos are still the reference point, and you should still be taking them every time that you go and see someone. And that's kind of where, like I was going to be going to New York this week, but I'm not going now. And it's like, it's not going to change how well I peak Emily. I've done it from afar how many times? And it's literally like, she's an experienced athlete. She knows how to run backstage. Like it's not that hard. I think the primary pros would be checking glaze, managing stage time, and getting to celebrate with your athlete. Outside of that, everything else from a decision-making process is super easy to the point that I don't even think you have a benefit being there in person.
Yeah, I think the con on the backside to that is having that environment, like getting in with your athlete or their significant others and letting that in-person excitement skew your judgment and what you want to be doing, and now kind of disregarding the data collection that you've had because I'll just go off the fly here with visuals. Which how hard is it to actually remember how how a person looked after 6 meals, or for every one of those meals, and the day before and the day before that? You can't do it. It's just right there in that moment. So to be able to compare back of like estimating where they are for the day and where they might head from that overnight period to wake up on show day could be really challenging if you're not sticking to your data. So if anything, getting in front of the client might skew you, and they're waiting for this also emotional response and reaction from you, which now you feel like, should I guard that reaction and, or should I hype them up every time? And then if they don't get that hype up, that's this other type of psychological aspect that you're having to manage. So, getting in front of client, we're talking to Alex, our J3U coach, around this about, you go in with your poker face and like, hey man, the job's not done till we are on stage and we hear the judge call out the outcomes. So we're still doing work here. And there's times to build up your athlete, but also you need to have it kind of a set standard to where you're not skewing their psychology along the way or making them feel like, oh no, like coach is now questioning what we're doing, and they start questioning themselves. So it's being consistent in that in-person setting, which is nice online because you have a moment to think and digest information and then repeat it. So with Alex, we're saying, hey, you go in the room, you take your photos, you get their weight, have some interaction. You're like, all right, let me get back and I'll send you the next plan. So you can go and actually think, process, and then send that over to your athlete. And another point too, is that I've been in person with a lot of athletes, and with prep, the brain goes out the window, right? So I've tried this and I've been like, do 100 grams of chicken, and we'll do 200 grams of rice and this and that. And then as they're prepping, weighing things out, like, how much chicken was it? Then they get to the rice, like, how much rice was it? I'm like, okay, never again. Like, I'm sending like the diet every single time, so they are able to look at it, and they're hungry. They're like, I'm so hungry, coach, I'm starving. Like, what am I eating? So it's like, let me text this to you so you have it and there's no mistakes made. And that gives me a time to sit and assess as well. So there's ways to manage it when you are in person, but that could be one of the cons that you don't have to deal with when you are doing this all from afar.
Man, that makes me think of our universe weekend. I had 2 athletes, you had 3 athletes. I think we came home with 4 pro cards that weekend. And it was just like a mess with like everybody trying to see us in person. I think we went like 3 Ubers just to go see these people in the different hotel rooms and different hotels. And it's like, man, like I'm going to just do this the same way that I would do it anyways. Like we could probably just do photos here, but it's fine.
It's fun though. Like because some of these athletes, you don't meet them like for years and
Yeah.
finally you do. And it's just the build up and hype just around those experiences is worth
fun.
it. Outside of like, oh, I'm going to peak this person exceptionally better. Like that's not necessarily the case, but more so just getting in that environment, right?
And
It's
creating
like,
community. Yeah.
so yeah, good times. Anything else, Luke, that really stands out for issues from afar versus in person, or benefits, or anything else you wanted to touch on?
Time zones, just because we need to talk about like the assessment within a time zone management perspective. I think as a coach, like I'm very big on like meal to meal assessments as we go through the last like 24 to 36 hours. And obviously Australia's time zone is terrible for us. So like during coach's weekend for Emily's last meal before show day, I sent it at like 5 a.m. here. And it's like, yeah, but that's what I chose to do. And that's the level and standard that I expect to put athletes on stage. Right. And so that's kind of where on that assessment piece, it's important as the coach to be willing and able to set alarms when it's time for each person to check in and be awake for a period of time so you're not groggy making decisions and doing that. Because I think that can influence the assessment piece some, is like if you're not sharp or fresh for those check-in updates, like I think it can make it hard. And I think it's something that we talk about this, like the standard you hold yourself to is the level of execution you hold yourself to as well. So the standard of like competing. On the coach's side, I think that's true as well, where like the assessment piece falls on you to hold yourself to the same level of execution that they expect to perform on. And I think that'd be like the last piece in assessment, I would say.
No, that's solid advice. And you have some earlier on athletes where they might not have the most ideal preps, and also the show is just such a learning experience for them. So you might not need to be so micromanaged with someone that's newer, because there's already so much for them to do, to where a little bit more of it is pre-planned out. But also if you're an earlier on coach, these are the learning points that you're going to be able to utilize. If you're experienced, you kind of already know this. And I think as you move up through higher level athletes, there is more in the line and more that does need to be micromanaged in earlier on athletes, not quite as much. But if you're an early on coach, like these are your learning points to be able to practice when you have those high level athletes that you are working with. So setting your standard is extremely appropriate just to be able to progress yourself as a coach. But yeah, I think we can wrap this up here, Luke, and just congratulations again to yourself and to Emily King on the pro card win, and also from Mel too. Had an amazing outing, and I'm sure she's on the right track and journey to knock it out like Emily too.
Yeah, she is. I think the last piece here is just like, if you guys are looking for coaching, we have the whole J3U coaching team, all kind of mentored by myself and John, and an unbelievable group of athletes as a collective. We've won 6 overalls in the last 6 weeks. So like just a really high performing team that's ready to be here using systems and data collection that, we've personally taught them. And so we built this team out of a standard of coaching that we expect to hold ourselves within the industry, and hold other people in the industry too. And that's kind of where that team collective came for us, is like doing the education side and elevating the industry in that side. It had to happen on the coaching side as well.
Yeah. We need those exemplary coaches to actually take it and be able to deploy it. Luke and I can only coach so many people. And then as we've shifted more to the education mentoring side, it's even made us more limited in who we can coach. So what better than to have some stellar coaches that are working alongside us now to take everything that you've listened to on our podcast or through J3U and implement it, and you can see it actually utilized. So if you're just an athlete trying to level up even your own coaching, working with a coach that does the practices that we are talking about and that we teach them directly is one of the best ways to learn it as well. So this is a mentorship program that we are teaching, but just working with a coach is a great way to be able to level up and gain so many valuable tools. So check us out at J3U Coaching coaching.com. You can fill out an application and you can meet with us, and then we can work to see who's going to be the best fit for you as a coach. For any questions, comments, if you're on YouTube, leave them down below. Luke and I will be happy to answer those for you. And otherwise, we will talk to you next time.